Toronto, and I'm the Chief of Protocol with the City. First, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many people. The City of Toronto also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. For those of you in attendance here today, we ask that you follow the following public health who are uniformed in different eras of the Canadian military history. Please rise as you are able for our national anthem, which will be followed by the last post, the silence, the lament, and the rouse. Please remain standing until after the reading of the Act of Remembrance and the commitment to remember.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
Promesse de se souvenir. Ils étaient jeunes, jeunes comme nous. Ils ont servi, donnant généreusement d'eux-mêmes. Nous leur promettons, en dépit du temps qui passe, de porter le flambeau et de ne jamais oublier. Nous nous souviendrons d'eux. Réponse, nous nous souviendrons d'eux. And now in English. They were young as we are young. They served, given freely of themselves. To them we pledge, amid the winds of time, to carry their torch and never forget. We will remember them. Response, we will remember them.
Please be seated. I wish to recognize the fly past of Canadian Harvard aircraft, which were used in training Canadian and Commonwealth airmen during the Second World War. I'd also like to thank Jerry Morgan, District Commander, Royal Canadian Legion, and veteran for reading the Act of Remembrance. The commitment to remember was read by Stephen Mensah, Executive Director, Toronto Youth Cabinet. I now wish to invite Sarah Galot from the Vimy Foundation to read the poem In Flanders Fields.
Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow. Loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
The poem was written by John McCrae in 1915. Its depiction of poppies growing between the graves of the fallen soldiers gave rise to the tradition of wearing red poppies in remembrance. This year marks 100 years of the remembrance poppy in Canada. I now wish to call upon His Worship John Tory, Mayor of Toronto, to address the gathering.
Well, good morning, and may I begin by saying how proud I am, and not surprised, but proud at how many people have come out today after what we've been through and what we're still going through, because this is such an important occasion, and it's so good that we can be together to celebrate this occasion. I'll acknowledge that we're celebrating here with representatives of the Government of Canada, the Honourable Marcy Ian, with representatives from the Ontario Legislature, Suze Morrison, MPP, and with colleagues on whose behalf I speak, my City Council colleagues, Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson and Councillor Shelley Carroll, and of course, most important of all, the veterans who are here with us today, we are here to honour those who are here and those who are not here. We have gathered here together today in the shadow of Old City Hall to remember, as residents of Toronto have been doing for more than 100 years now. We gather here because they, men and women from this city and from across Canada, did their duty. And they often did way more than their duty. Because they answered the call, because they left their homes and families behind, and because many of them never returned from that battlefield, it is our duty to remember them, to never forget. That is the sacred covenant to those who have fallen and sacrificed for the Canada that we honor today. Over the past century, we have mourned the more than 117,000 Canadians, almost 10,000 from Toronto, who made the ultimate sacrifice for Canada and for the freedoms and the peace that we enjoy today. 10,000 of our city's daughters and sons, our neighbors, our friends. Today, we remember them, and we promise them that their city, their home, will never forget them. We also remember the many who fought and returned from Europe and from the Pacific and from Korea so many years ago, as well as in peacekeeping, in the Gulf War 30 years ago, and more recently in Afghanistan. I would be remiss if I did not mention the Indigenous veterans who fought in these wars and participated in these peacekeeping missions. As history shows, they served, but they're often underrepresented in Remembrance Day ceremonies and recognition. For generations, Indigenous veterans were not recognized for their service. Indigenous Veterans Day this past Monday honored their service, but I believe it is important to acknowledge it here today as well on Remembrance Day. Approximately 12,000 First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people served in the First and Second World Wars, as well as in Korea. We know that today there are as many as 2,700 Indigenous peoples in uniform serving our country. We remember and acknowledge and honor all Indigenous veterans who have served and continue to serve. We will not forget them. While much of the focus of Remembrance Day is often on the world wars, we also remember those who have fallen in very recent wars and whose lives were cut short, and those who were traumatized by their service in those wars. We have stories of people like Corporal Ainsworth Dyer, who should be remembered every year. Corporal Dyer grew up in Toronto and enlisted in the Canadian Forces in 1997. He first joined the 48th Highlanders here in our city before serving in the 3rd Battalion Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. In 2000, he served in peace support efforts in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Then, in 2002, Dyer was deployed to Afghanistan, where he lost his life at the age of 24 in a friendly fire incident. He had lived in St. Jamestown and in Cabbagetown, and he was buried with full military honors in the Necropolis Cemetery. His service and loss remind us of the sacrifice those who serve make every single day and the lasting impact on families and neighborhoods. For it is because of them and all that they did and do on the front lines that we're able to enjoy the freedom and peace that we have here today. They make it possible for us to be here together in peace and in comfort. And freedom is definitely not free. It is why we've been wearing the red poppy every year at this time for the last 100 years. This iconic symbol reminds each and every one of us of the Canadians who gave their lives in service to their country. In fact, it was here at Old City Hall in 1921, 100 years ago to this very day, when the first poppy wreath was presented to my predecessor, Mayor Thomas Church. In that first year alone, 1 million poppies were distributed in Canada, and almost $200,000 was raised, an immense sum in those days. It was the start of what has become an essential form of community support for the Royal Canadian Legion. Today, the last wreath that will be placed on this day will be placed in honor of the Year of the Poppy by a veteran of the Second World War and a veteran of the Canadian mission in Afghanistan to remember all of those who've made the ultimate sacrifice over the last 100 years. Toronto was a very different place during the World Wars. We acknowledge the contributions of the men and women from many diverse backgrounds and experiences who served on the front lines and in the war effort here on the home front. They helped build the country and the city that we live in today. And we acknowledge their bravery in their service and in confronting racism and discrimination and other barriers in our own society, a society they fought to protect. Today, I'm also thinking about Leonard Braithwaite, who at the age of 20 tried to sign up to help fight the Second World War just down the street at a recruitment office at Bay and Wellington. Once a month, for 4 months, he tried to enlist and was rejected every time by recruiting officers unwilling to accept a black Canadian into the armed forces. Imagine loving a country so much that you're willing to put your life on the line, and that same country tells you no because you're black. It was wrong, to say the least. But Leonard Braithwaite never gave up. He was determined to do his duty. This is a great Toronto story because a new recruiting officer of Ukrainian descent accepted his application. The recruiting officer had shared with Leonard the experiences of Ukrainian and Polish Canadians who had also faced discrimination when trying to enlist. Leonard joined the Royal Canadian Air Force as a safety equipment operator stationed overseas in England and served with the No. 6 Bomber Command as an engine mechanic and safety equipment worker. After the war, Leonard studied at the University of Toronto, the Harvard Business School, and the Osgoode Hall Law School. And following a legal career, he served as a member of provincial parliament representing Etobicoke from 1963 to 1975, the first black Canadian to be elected to the Ontario legislature. Leonard Braithwaite died in March of 2012, but we remember him here today. Our city has changed thanks to people like Leonard and that recruiting officer. Over the years, we've been joined by many residents from many more countries around the world. Some have taken refuge here from war and conflict elsewhere. Just this past year, we began welcoming people fleeing Afghanistan and looking for a new life here in Canada and here in Toronto. They are today our neighbors and our friends. This is so important to the ideals and values that we cherish as Canadians, and we must ensure that that lives on. On Remembrance Day, we are reminded of what can happen if we let polarization and division grow, and if we let hatred and discrimination go unchallenged. I believe that the conflicts that we have seen and fought in the last century have forged a stronger Toronto and a stronger Canada, where we know diversity is in fact our strength, and we embrace and we live by those values and beliefs. This is a place where people live in harmony and in peace. But we have also seen just how fragile that is. We see polarized discourse, acts of hatred, and unwillingness to sit down and work things through together, instead sometimes seemingly preferring conflict over dialogue. Remembrance Day should inspire us to reinforce our determination to listen to each other, to not talk past each other, or to try to make the other person smaller. Remembrance Day should inspire us to strengthen our commitments to respect and to affirm our rejection of hatred and division. Our way of life is founded on these values. It is what the people that we honor today fought for: the opportunity to live in a free, respectful society where we support each other, where we build each other up and not tear each other down. Nous vivons dans un pays de liberté et opportunité aujourd'hui parce qu'ils ont fait un énorme sacrifice pour nous. C'est pourquoi nous devons protéger les bénédictions nous avons, et cela commence pour nous rappeler ce qu'ils ont fait pour nous. Remembrance Day should also give us hope. Hope because in the Great Wars, freedom did triumph over tyranny, though at a great cost. And if there was ever a year beyond those war years when we need and should have hope, it is this year, as we emerge from the nightmare of the pandemic. With limited exceptions, we have shown that when we pull together, support each other, and maintain a determination to do what is in the collective interest of us all, we can achieve great things, despite great sacrifice, just as those we honor today did for us. Today, in 2021, we are able to gather here because of the courage and sacrifice of those who defended our freedom, and thanks to the courage and sacrifice of those who more recently cared for us, for our health and well-being. And that specifically includes, yet again, members of the Canadian Forces who came to help us in the battle against COVID-19. It is hard to put into words the debt that we owe to those who have fought for us, who have served us, and in some cases who have given up their lives for us, and the debt that we owe to those who continue to serve us today. We can ensure that we never forget them and what they did. But likely just as important would be for us to redouble our efforts to live by the values that they fought for, the value system they defended, the Canadian way of life, the Toronto way of life that is not perfect, but is admired around the world. That would be an active and ongoing tribute every single day to them and what they did for us. We will and we must remember them, lest we forget.
I will now invite representatives of governments, armed forces and veterans, and other organizations to place their wreaths. The City of Toronto, His Worship, Mayor John Tory. Government and Parliament of Canada, the Honourable Marcy Ian, Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth, MP for Toronto Centre. Province of Ontario, Ms. Suze Morrison, MPP, Toronto Centre. Veterans Affairs Canada, Sarah Gendy, Veterans Service Team Manager. Royal Canadian Navy, Captain Timothy O'Leary will represent HMCS York, and Commander Walter Moniz will be supporting HMCS Toronto. (32) Canadian Brigade Group, Canadian Army, Colonel John McEwen, Commander, and Brigade Sergeant Major Frank Accio, Chief Warrant Officer. Royal Canadian Legion, Jerry Morgan, District D Commander. On behalf of the Youth of Toronto, Stephen Mensah, Executive Director, Toronto Youth Cabinet. I would now like to invite representatives of veterans organizations, school boards, city divisions, agencies and corporations, labor organizations, and community groups to lay their wreaths at the direction of city staff. Laying the final wreath in honor of the Year of the Poppy are Marvin Gordon, a Second World War veteran, and a veteran of the Afghanistan mission, Major General, retired Dave Fraser, a former commander of Canadian forces in Afghanistan. Now please rise if you are able for the benediction, which will be followed by the royal anthem. The benediction will be given by Chaplain Philip C. Ralph, Captain retired from Wounded Warriors Canada.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for the proud privilege of gathering, as is our custom in this place. As Torontonians have done since this cenotaph was dedicated, acknowledging the service in the Great War, we together gratefully embrace the service, loyalty, and sacrifice of the members of our Canadian Armed Forces, stretching back to even before our Confederation. Our military has always been a beacon of hope, doing what others could not, would not, or said was impossible. This Remembrance Day, as our nation pauses to honor and remember the service and sacrifice of Canadian Armed Forces members who stood and served from the very beginnings at Lundy's Lane and Queenston Heights, from Periburg to Passchendaele, from the mud at Ypres to the heights at Vimy, from the Battle of Britain to victory in the Atlantic, from Dieppe to Ortona, to Juno, to Cap Young, to a multitude of United Nations missions, from the Madak Pocket to Panjwai and Kandahar, to Iraq and the Ukraine and Mali. Today, the bounds of service throughout our history has been so powerfully illustrated and acknowledged by the laying of the final wreath by a veteran of the Second World War and by General Dave Fraser, who commanded our troops in Afghanistan. Those in harm's way have always seen the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces as bringers of hope. However, hope has a cost. Today, even as our hearts go out to the families of the fallen, our hearts are also with the veterans and their families, especially those for whom the battle lives on, as they bear the physical, emotional, and psychological scars of their service. We here today commit to work together to improve the lives and the care and support for our Canadian Armed Forces members and their families, past, present, and on into the future. No matter where our members of the Canadian Forces have served, we know one thing. The Canadians who served and are serving, Canadians who bear the scars of their service, the Canadians who have shed their blood, and those who've made the ultimate sacrifice, fought in one great tradition that has always been the hallmark of the Canadian service members: confronting tyranny, being on the vanguard of freedom, and coming to the aid of others. They responded to the needs of others with honor and with courage. Unlike other nations in our history, Canada's military history is not one of expansion and land grabbing. We are indebted to their service, and so we pick up the time-honored refrain: take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we flow. The torch be yours and hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we will not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. Honor the fallen, help the living, go in peace. Amen.
Thank you for attending the ceremony. Music is provided by the band of the 7th Toronto Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery, under the direction of Captain Niccolo Arijo. The piper is from the 48th Highlanders of Canada. The parade will now march off with the mayor taking the salute. Members of the public are welcome to place their poppies on the cenotaph after the vigil sentries have departed, lest we forget. Thank you.